As the summer of 1944 unfolded, while the Allies aggressively pushed through France following the successful D-Day landings, a crucial yet often overlooked confrontation was brewing on the Eastern Front. Here, the ubiquitous German Panther tank emerged as a symbol of the Wehrmacht's technological prowess, fueling both the mythology and reality of German armored warfare. Designed to confront the formidable Soviet T-34, the Panther boasted an impressive balance of firepower, mobility, and protective features. Its sloped armor configuration was heralded as a revolutionary approach to tank design, creating a significant dichotomy between theory and battlefield truths. However, as Allied forces adapted their tactics and innovations, the Panther's celebrated exterior began to show cracks, both literally and figuratively. The Panther was introduced in the summer of 1943, and crews quickly learned to rely on its formidable armor and high-velocity 75mm QK-42 L-70 gun, which allowed them to engage enemy vehicles at long ranges effectively. The tank's steeper frontal armor enhanced its resilience against standard anti-tank ammunition, with its sloping design often deflecting incoming rounds. For German commanders, the Panther epitomized what their forces stood for: high technology epitomized in a vehicle engineered for both offensive and defensive operations. However, dissenting voices and operational realities were starting to surface, especially from the Eastern Front, where the brutal realities of combat exposed the Panther's vulnerabilities. Crucially, while the Panther's frontal armor was rated among the best of any tank at the time, its side armor presented a different narrative. German engineers, initially focused on countering the formidable threat of the T-34, used an assumption, perhaps overly optimistic, that engagements would largely take place head-on. This oversight was a grave miscalculation, as numerous engagements throughout the war illustrated an essential truth. Most tank confrontations did not occur in a controlled environment, where geometry favored the 45-degree angles of the Panther's sloped armor. Instead, the realities of combat often meant that vehicles would find themselves outflanked or attacked from less protected angles, leaving vulnerabilities exposed. By early 1944, as the Soviet Red Army pursued a series of offensives, including the successful encirclement at the Battle of Kursk, the Panther's weaknesses became glaringly evident. As the Western Allies embarked on their massive Normandy operation, German tank crews found themselves besieged on multiple fronts, each revealing more about the Panther's engineering shortcomings. The ensuing laborious combat, marked by a combination of attrition warfare and tactical inadequacies, started to expose the latent fragility of the Panther's side armor, which measured just 40 millimeters at its thickest points. And this was often coupled with poor quality manufacturing practices exacerbated by wartime shortages. In encounters, American Sherman tanks equipped with the new M48 AP rounds began targeting Panthers with surprising effectiveness, exploiting their lateral vulnerabilities. The stage was set for a famous clash at the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944, where the Panther would face a bitter trial by fire. The operation, meant to strike a decisive blow against Allied forces during a critical winter lull, relied heavily on the Panther's capabilities to penetrate through thinly held American lines. However, as the German forces faced short supply lines and dwindling fuel reserves, many Panthers were forced to operate under subpar conditions. Despite these challenges, the Panther crews adhered to their training and maintained their faith in the tank's protective capabilities and firepower, eager to demonstrate that the Panther could still outmaneuver and outgun the relatively lighter American armor. However, in the tight confines of the Ardennes forest, where visibility was reduced and ambush potential skyrocketed, the Panthers found themselves in precarious scenarios. As they thundered through the snow-laden trees, American forces, equipped with potent bazookas and the recently introduced M1A1 76mm guns, awaited with determination. The tactical positioning was often dictated by the density of the woodlands, where angles of engagement did not favor the Panther's armor. Each detonation of an American projectile against the exposed side plates of a Panther signified a cataclysmic failure of expectations. It was not uncommon for American soldiers to report that they had struck a Panther from the flank and saw their shells penetrate with alarming ease. As these battles unfolded, it became evident that the equation shifted, compelling German commanders to re-evaluate their armored doctrine and the assumed supremacy of the Panther in supporting tactical objectives. The increasing toll on crews was heart-wrenching, underscoring the stark contrast between the hallowed reputation of the Panther and the grim realities of battlefield losses. As tanks were lost not merely to mechanical failures, but tragically from the unexpected vulnerabilities in their armor, the psychological ramifications on German crews could not be overstated. Many began to lose faith, questioning the very machine they had been led to believe was invincible. The loss of the proverbial tiger became tangible, forcing commanders to think critically about their operational strategies. Fleeting triumphs against Allied divisions had once bolstered soldier morale, but as American units had begun to exploit the Panther's shortcomings, German tank crews were faced with the stark reality of their situation. The light of hope that had ignited their pursuit of armored dominance was extinguished, yielding to the chaos of war, where tactical retreats and desperate strategies became paramount. The clash between engineering illusions and battlefield realities manifested not only in tactical losses, but in a reshaping of post-war military thought as well. Tactical adaptations on the American side, evolving from lessons learned in combat, were documented and disseminated vigorously. The Panther's exposed weaknesses undermined its legacy, leading to heightened vigilance in anti-tank tactics across the Allies, ultimately fostering further innovations in tank warfare. German forces, now caught in the throes of desperate strategizing, found themselves scrambling to both adapt existing tanks and advance new designs, which would take months to materialize, if at all. In retrospect, the Panther tank serves as a pivotal case study in the complexities of armored warfare. It symbolizes both the heights of German engineering brilliance and the harsh truths of battlefield limitations. As lessons unfolded during the harrowing confrontations of 1944, the Panther embodied the tragic irony of war, a well-designed weapon that, due to cognitive biases in planning and execution, ultimately faltered against the very adversaries it was engineered to conquer. The human toll, manifested in lost lives and shattered morale, stands as the haunting legacy of a machine that was respected and feared, yet tragically flawed in its design where it mattered most. The narrative surrounding the Panther encapsulates the unique dance between advancement and hubris, a solemn testament to the unforgiving nature of warfare that transcends generations. As the summer of 1944 ensued, the battlefield dynamics in Western Europe were poised on a precipice, characterized by fluid and relentless confrontation. American armored divisions, emboldened by their recent victories in campaigns like Normandy, began methodically analyzing German tank designs. The Panther, which had once surged across the European landscape bearing the insignia of the Wehrmacht, was increasingly scrutinized not just for its formidable firepower and sloped armor, but for its critical vulnerabilities. Tactical engagements in the Falaise pocket exemplified the importance of reconnaissance and the effective use of combined arms operations, revealing just how easily the celebrated German armor could falter when faced with systematic American strategies designed for maximum efficiency. The Americans, aware of the Panther's reputation, had initially approached encounters with trepidation. However, as adversarial experience accumulated, they began to unravel the dichotomy between the Panther's perceived invincibility and its actual field performance. The tank's armor, designed to resist penetrative attacks, was intended to withstand frontal assaults. But as Sherman's outfitted with experimental 76mm guns and combined arms units with infantry support, and artillery barrages adapted to exploit lateral and rear weaknesses, the inherent flaws in German armor became painfully evident. The killed-in-action statistics for the U.S. troops climbed steadily as they engaged in what equipment manual debriefings dubbed flank maneuvers, a tactical adjustment that would echo throughout armored strategies in succeeding campaigns. Information dominance played a crucial role in these encounters. American forces were adept at creating a robust framework of intelligence through reliable reconnaissance and aerial spotting. This intelligence network allowed them to observe Panther positions and organize ambushes with pinpoint accuracy. Soldiers and commanders alike learned to utilize the terrain, the enriching tapestry of hedgerows and ruins, not as mere obstacles, but as strategic allies. By concealing themselves within these natural formations, American tank crews could deliver unexpected volleys, striking at the flanks where the Panther was less fortified. The grim irony of this tactical evolution was that the very features in which the Germans had invested considerable ingenuity to create a superior tank became the instruments of its demise. Amidst this tactical reshuffling, the human element of warfare took center stage. Soldiers on both fronts wrestled with their fears and uncertainties amidst the cacophony of battle. For the American GIs, there was a palpable sense of anxiety each time they heard the rumble of German armor approaching. Personal accounts and letters painted a vivid picture of young men grappling with responsibility, fear, and a longing for home, often at odds with the exhilarating yet horrific reality of warfare. Faced with the daunting prospect of encountering a Panther, the American tankers underwent rigorous training to ensure their survival. They honed skills that would allow them to communicate flawlessly in the midst of chaos, manipulating their machines to maximize effectiveness under fire. On the flip side, German crews, believing in their Panther's robust reputation, were increasingly disillusioned by the failures they confronted. Engaging in skirmishes where previously celebrated tactics turned to dust underscored a sinister reality. Their tank's armor was not as impenetrable as they had been led to believe. The reports flooding in from the front lines depicted a qualitative decline in morale, where once proud crews now faced demoralization, grappling with the painful juxtaposition of the Panther's technological promise against its operational shortcomings. The refreshing energy of the blitzkrieg tactics, which had once enabled sweeping victories, had metamorphosed into a grim panorama of retreat and reactive maneuvers, each encounter further entrenching a state of wariness in the hearts of the tank crews. German command, grappling with the dire news from the front, was compelled to rethink its strategic approach, urging engineers to find quick solutions to the Panther's vulnerabilities. Their decisions, marred by the urgency of diminishing resources and personnel on the battlefield, precipitated a frantic cycle of design changes and tactical adaptations. The need to reinforce side and rear armor without sacrificing mobility and speed transformed production lines into tense workshops, where the pressure to innovate was matched only by the dire circumstances confronting their forces. Each engineering design yielded a promise of improvement, but as these solutions were often rendered in a desperate race against time, their effectiveness in rallying beleaguered German divisions was consistently underwhelming. As the conflict drew towards late 1944, the formidable German tank crews were left to grapple with a harsh truth. Their army was forced to adapt in a tactical environment where speed and technology often outpaced traditional battle doctrines. The advantageous use of inherently vulnerable areas on their tanks meant that engagements devolved from showcasing armored superiority to avoiding catastrophic loss. The narrative of the Panther tank thus transitioned from an emblem of technological prowess to one that manifested vulnerability and attrition in the brutal theater of war. The ultimate irony of the Panther's armor was that while its frontal aspect remained robust and innovative, the growing recognition of its side weaknesses fostered a silent evolution in American armored doctrine. The Allies adopted agile tank strategies that transformed how engagements were fought, shifting the paradigm away from head-on confrontations to flanking maneuvers that would exploit every vulnerability identified in German specifications. The tragedy was united with the resilience of human persistence. American soldiers would adapt, learn, and implement these strategies under the most harrowing conditions. Every frontline loss instigated a subsequent response that pushed tactical innovation forward, showcasing the dynamic nature of warfare where the lessons learned directly correlated with the blood price paid on both sides. In the grand scheme of World War II, the Panther embodies dual narratives, one of technical ambition and the detriment of operational oversight, that ultimately became a cautionary tale against over-reliance on technology without consideration of human adaptability and tactical ingenuity. The consequences of the Panther's shortcomings underscored a sobering legacy in armored warfare that reverberated beyond the battlegrounds of Europe, shaping post-war military doctrine as nations came to terms with the complex interplay of technology, strategy, and humanity that defines the conduct of war. As these stories of valor and defeat unfold, viewers are invited to reflect on the moral and tactical lessons of armored warfare. The multifaceted nature of such historical narratives continues to shape contemporary interpretations of combat and strategy. Join the discussion and share your thoughts on the intricate layers of these events throughout history. Your voice matters in recounting the lessons learned from the past. Subscribe for more insights into the heroic and tragic tales from the world of military history. As the theater of World War II progressed, the Panther tank's reputation as the pinnacle of German armored engineering became increasingly juxtaposed against its vulnerabilities. Throughout the latter half of the conflict, the high expectations set by the Wehrmacht and its leaders were tested not only by the rigors of combat, but by the existential realities of resource shortages, logistical obstacles, and often flawed operational strategies. The Panther's side armor, initially perceived as a minor concern, morphed into a critical focal point for American and Allied forces, revealing the nuanced relationship between technological advancement and battlefield effectiveness. The German High Command's initial confidence in the Panther's design, particularly its sloped armor, led to a deprioritization of weaknesses in the tank's sides. Instead of considering the likelihood of flanking maneuvers employed by enemy forces, they embraced a narrative of invulnerability that reflected Germany's early war successes. However, the tide of conflict shifted dramatically as the Allies began to experiment with new tactics, catalyzed by brutal confrontations in the European theater. Specifically, American forces recognized that the mobility of their armored divisions could be leveraged to execute envelopment tactics, circumventing the formidable front armor that had become known for its robustness. Combat reports from the front lines highlighted the Panther's Achilles heel. Its side armor, inadequately thin in comparison to its formidable frontal protection, often succumbed to both conventional anti-tank fire and heavier caliber munitions. The introduction of the American 76mm gun, which boasted an improved velocity and projectile design, started to resonate through the ranks of armored divisions. M2 armored units, employing a doctrine of speed and surprise, became adept at targeting the sides of German armor. Engagements in locales such as Normandy and the Ardennes served only to deepen this realization, as American strategies began to evolve in real time in response to lessons learned from encounters with Panthers. Meanwhile, the human element in these victories and losses cannot be overstated. Soldiers faced a blending of fear, valor, and ingenuity as they engaged in a deadly chess match on the fields of Europe. Each encounter spawned new adaptations. Crews learned to work swiftly with their own tanks to exploit weaknesses tactically. Commanding officers would peer through optics with a piercing focus on enemy statuses, issuing directives that emphasized mobility and tactical positioning. The experience of American tank crews became steeped in a unique blend of technical proficiency and battlefield creativity, as troops often had to devise homemade solutions to reinforce their armor or enhance firepower through improvised methods, working tirelessly within the constraints imposed by supply lines. The dire consequences of the Panther's weaknesses quickly emerged, emphasized by stark statistics often concealed in narrative histories. A series of engagements during Operation Cobra, for instance, underscored both the fragility of the assumptions surrounding German armor and the terrible cost of reassessing armor effectiveness too late. American forces, emboldened through their sustained engagement, began to launch coordinated strikes aimed at the Panther's more exposed areas, capitalizing on terrain features and displacing operational strategy. Veterans recounted harrowing encounters that underscored the grim reality of war, taking cover amid trees or rubble while ensuring alignment for a critical shot that could mean the difference between life and death. The chilling experiences did not merely affect the soldiers on the battlefield. They seeped into the fabric of military culture in ways that would inform future operations and combat philosophies. In response to the growing effectiveness of American tactics, German field commanders began to display a noticeable shift in their deployment and engagement strategies. As losses mounted, they were compelled to rethink operations and fight, rather than simply rely on the engineering prestige of their armored divisions. Some units would adopt tighter formations, seeking to protect their flanks in an environment characterized by agility and unorthodox American maneuvers. Trained to perceive the battlefield systematically, American armor units deployed skirmish lines that sought first to engage the Panthers from advantageous positions. In doing so, the psychological toll began to reveal itself among German crews, many of whom started to doubt the invulnerability of their tanks, recognizing that their proud technological advancements were not impervious to evolving operational dynamics and the chaos of frontline combat. As the war dragged on, the interaction between technology and human experience became a predominant characteristic of armored warfare. Both American and German crews endured insurmountable strains, often translating into moments of profound heroism or tragic loss. Soldiers equipped with limited resources and wavering morale learned not only the technical specifications of their vehicles, but also the human dimension of combat. Relationships formed under fire, raw emotions shared among comrades, and the heavy price of war weighed heavily on every decision made in the heat of conflict. Each life lost prompted introspective reflections on strategy. As casualties mounted, the brutality of war forced numerous military leaders to reassess their doctrines and approach. The impact of the Panther's design flaws extended beyond immediate tactical engagements. It initiated a discourse on the role of engineering within warfare. As lessons from the front lines permeated military discussions back in Germany, the limitations of a single-minded focus on technological prowess became apparent. With growing concern over the consequences of neglecting human adaptability, Wehrmacht commanders struggled unraveling the perplexing web of expected victories secured by technology and the growing reality of its shortcomings. The tension between reliance on advanced engineering and the adaptability of human soldiers epitomized a turning point in armored warfare, wherein the balance between man and machine began to crystallize into a more integrated framework of operational art. Ultimately, the Panther's operational history serves not only as a critical case study in armored warfare, but also encapsulates the essence of World War II itself, a colossal confrontation marked by ingenuity, resilience, and the tragic cost of overstated assumptions. It is a narrative punctuated by the assertion that while armor can innovate, it is the human spirit, born through the struggles of conflict, that commands true resilience and adaptation. In the wake of a bitter struggle for supremacy on the battlefield, the shift from mere technological advancement to a holistic understanding of warfare's demands became evident, setting a precedent that military leaders across the globe would acknowledge in addressing the complexities of warfare that continue to endure even today. The Panther tank, officially designated as the Panzer IV, was hailed by the German High Command as the apex of armored warfare technology. With its sloped armor design and formidable 75mm gun, it was intended to counter the Soviet T-34 and provide the Wehrmacht with an undeniable advantage on the Eastern Front. However, this veneer of invincibility soon began to erode under the scrutiny of battlefield realities. The gamble that emphasized advanced engineering over tactical flexibility created a bifurcation in operational philosophy that would haunt German commanders throughout the war. Crew members and commanders alike developed a deep-seated trust in the Panther's protective qualities, leading to complacency that would ultimately be shaken by a series of devastating encounters. As the war progressed, it became evident that while the Panther excelled in frontal engagements, its side armor presented a glaring vulnerability, a fact that was underscored during American testing that revealed significant weaknesses. This critical flaw was often overlooked in the fervor of battle, where the favor of tank-on-tank encounters clouded the more nuanced tactics of warfare. Commanders caught between the tactical realities of combat and the mythos surrounding the Panther struggled with the implications of this newfound information. The U.S. Army, conducting their own rigorous examinations of captured German vehicles, unwittingly held a mirror to the failings of a technology that promised more than it could deliver. In practical terms, the rigidity of the Panther's design left its crews defensively unprepared in flanking maneuvers. This was particularly detrimental as American tactics evolved to exploit the very vulnerability that the Panther's defenders had grown to rely on. The 76 mm gun of the Sherman tanks, especially when used in enfilade firing positions, showcased the Panther's essential weakness. In clear contrast to German doctrine, which favored direct engagement and frontal assault, Allied strategists learned to adapt their strategies, employing coordinated maneuvers that targeted the side and rear armor of German tanks. It was here that the balance of power shifted palpably. The psychological landscape of the battlefield became increasingly complicated as well. German crews, who once approached the conflict with a sense of technological superiority, found themselves facing existential doubts as their trust in the Panther faltered. The fateful battles of Kursk and Normandy revealed that initial encounters, which had bred overconfidence, were not indicative of the greater reality facing German armored forces. In the face of mounting losses, rumors of Panther failures started to spread, exacerbating anxiety amongst crew members. Howard, a young commander of a Panther battalion, noted in his diary the growing trepidation among his men as they prepared for the next encounter with American forces. He felt the tension of their anticipation morph into dread, as even brief technical issues became magnified under the stress of warfare. As the harsh European winter of 1944 descended upon the continent, logistical challenges began compounding the Panther's technical vulnerabilities. The failure of supply lines, exacerbated by the Allies' relentless air campaign, stifled the regular maintenance that was crucial for the Panther's complex machinery. Fuel shortages, coupled with the rigorous demands on tank crews, resulted in mechanical failures that left the Panthers immobile at critical junctures. For an armored vehicle that required careful handling and frequent servicing, the inability to maintain standards not only led to increased casualties, but also forced extreme measures that undermined unit cohesion. Crew members often resorted to makeshift repairs, a practice that only further compounded the technical issues already plaguing their tanks. As the Allies engineered their strategies to capitalize on German shortcomings, one could see the haunting realization that technology alone could not guarantee victory. The tragic irony was that the very soldiers who placed their faith in state-of-the-art engineering were falling victim to the unpredictability of war. The Panther's delayed production caused increasing desperation in the field. Commanders faced with waning numbers sought unconventional solutions. The deployment of younger, less experienced crew members became an untenable solution, as their lack of tactical acumen only increased exposure to enemy fire, particularly in the regions where Allied forces had begun to coordinate joint arms attacks, utilizing infantry and air support in symphony with armored units. This interaction between human adaptability and mechanized warfare became a central theme in the Western theater, adding an emotional weight to an already harrowing landscape. Veteran soldiers, who had once embraced the might of their armor, became witnesses to its fast unraveling. The young Panther operators, who stood at their hatches with a mix of trepidation and resolve, represented a cohort finding their footing amidst chaos, an often romanticized ritual of brotherhood forged in the crucible of battle. Their stories filled with moments of bravery and fear placed not just the technological failures into perspective, but highlighted the deeply personal cost of the war. The thin line between life and death was navigated not solely by the prowess of the vehicles they operated, but by the human spirit that drove them forward against overwhelming odds. As the invasion of Normandy unfolded, these interwoven narratives came to a head. Crews entering the fray encountered staggering losses, not only due to Allied air supremacy, but also from the realities of tactical inflexibility inherent within the Panther's design philosophy. The lack of adaptability in these machines paralleled the emotional quandaries experienced by the German soldiers. Even the most advanced armor was impotent against an enemy committed to understanding and exploiting its weaknesses. Gradually, the realization sunk in that the battlefield was as much about the valor and resilience of its personnel as it was about the machinery they relied upon. In examining the legacy of the Panther tank, it becomes evident that the lessons learned extend far beyond the armor itself. The intersection of technical superiority, tactical adaptability, and human sacrifice poignantly encapsulates the evolution of warfare. The Panther's complex technical flaws mirrored the broader struggles within the Wehrmacht as it grappled with the weight of its assumptions about dominance through technology. Hence, even amid the heavy artillery and advancing infantry, the most profound victories came not solely from innovative weaponry, but rather from the indomitable spirit of the men who utilized them, reminding all participants in this catastrophic chapter of history that amidst armor, tactics, and sheer will, the human experience remained paramount. As the summer of 1944 progressed, the realities of tank warfare on the Western Front began to unravel the narrative carefully spun by the Third Reich. The Panther, revered by German commanders as a technological marvel, was increasingly exposed to the harsh scrutiny of battlefield performance. U.S. forces adeptly recognized the Panther's reputed strengths. The 75mm KWK-42 L-70 gun, capable of penetrating the thickly armored M4 Sherman from long distances. Yet it was not the front armor that proved to be its Achilles heel. Instead, the well-concealed vulnerabilities along the flanks and rear of the tank became the focal point for Allied strategy. These operational shortcomings were not mere technical miscalculations. They reflected profound ramifications on the morale and efficacy of German armored divisions. The Battle of Normandy itself served as a gruesome proving ground for these observations. U.S. strategists, having learned from the bitter confrontations in North Africa and Italy, adapted their approaches with increasing sophistication. Grounded in the principles of combined arms, they coordinated air support and infantry maneuvers to stretch the limits of German defenses. The Allies developed a strategy of deploying tank destroyers like the M10 Wolverine, equipped with 3-inch guns fed with high-velocity rounds, specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in heavier German tanks. The decisions made at command level became increasingly pivotal, as the pressure of successive assaults forced German commanders into precarious positions, either yielding ground or risking further losses at the hands of coordinated enemy fire. In an effort to counteract losses, Luftwaffe units were summoned to provide air cover, yet frequently arrived too late, hamstrung by fuel shortages and the relentless barrage of Allied air superiority. This predicament created an environment where reliance on infantry support for armored operations, rather than synergistic combat, became more pronounced. The ground reality of being an armored crew in a Panther tank soon transitioned from sheer belief in technological superiority to the unadulterated fear of becoming a target for well-executed enemy maneuvers. Panther crews, mostly inexperienced soldiers, faced harrowing realizations as they navigated the shattered landscapes of Normandy, oftentimes forced to drive into fields laced with anti-tank mines, and faced harassment from snipers ensconced in the rubble. Incident reports began to echo the growing concern over the Panther's vulnerability, particularly its side armor, which was unexpectedly thin and susceptible to attacks from smaller caliber weaponry and roadside ambush tactics. One notable incident occurred as a section of Panther tanks attempted to advance through a village near Caen. They came under fire from a concealed American anti-tank team. The crew in one vehicle attempted to reposition for optimal angle, but found their flank exposed to fire, the front armor offering little protection against the lethal explosion of a 76mm round, striking the side in a planned ambush. The vehicle erupted, and the specter of war consumed both the machine and its crew. This instance became emblematic of a broader problem, vividly illustrating the fallibility of even the mightiest artillery when confronted with tactical ingenuity and grim determination. As each clash illustrated these revelations, German high command grappled with the psychological ramifications of crumbling invincibility. Promotions and honors were often equated with victories, yet with losses mounting and the horrors of retreat looming, fear seeped into the ranks. The weight of casualties turned the once celebrated narratives of mechanized warfare into stories of tragedy and despair. tank crews emerged from their tanks with shell shock, their resolve crumbling as political propaganda met the grim realities of combat. The very technology that had once instilled a sense of pride in the Wehrmacht now symbolized impending disaster. Meanwhile, American intelligence continued to refine its understanding of both the Panther's capabilities and limitations. Extended reconnaissance missions aimed to uncover deployment patterns while determining tactical approaches to disrupt German supply lines. The result was a continuous feedback loop in which lessons learned on the battlefield directly influenced operational strategies. Even as more panzer divisions engaged with ferocity, they found themselves outmatched by superior tactics, coupled with the relentless bombardment from both air and ground. The impact of logistics, ensuring fuels, ammunition, and reinforcement of troops, became a vital component of the struggle. American forces made extensive use of mobile supply depots, guarding the arteries of war that enabled the advance, while the German military's logistical framework faltered, beleaguered by losses and disruptions. As the war drew on, the tactical ingenuity of the Allies transformed into an indomitable force, ultimately culminating in the encirclement of German armored divisions. The pivotal moment arrived during Operation Cobra, where U.S. forces executed a coordinated bombing campaign against German troop formations, followed by thrusts into the exposed flanks of their lines. The Panthers, once feared on the battlefield, found themselves outmaneuvered. Lack of communication cascaded the surrender of entire units, as isolated tank crews faced overwhelming odds, with their trust in their machinery failing them. Panther crews faced gruesome fates, from burning alive in their vehicles to being captured and isolated in dispersing units. The humanity behind the tanks was overshadowed by the systemic failure of the war effort. The emotional toll on the soldiers who once believed themselves to be the cutting edge of a new era of warfare incited a profound crisis of spirit. The personal narratives of each crewman reflected their transformation from proud defenders to anxious survivors forced to confront the stark reality of war in all its brutality. In sum, the saga of the Panther tank serves as more than a tale of technological advancement or mechanical complexity. It crystallizes the pivotal interplay between technology, tactics, and the human experience during wartime. As the conflict illuminated the harsh lessons of adaptability and resilience, it also encapsulated moments where individual courage surged forth, highlighting the shared humanity amidst the machinery of war. The Panther tank's fate serves as an indelible reminder that even the best-laid plans, when unsupported by logistical coherence and human resolve, can collapse under the weight of reality. For those dedicated to understanding the full spectrum of history's lessons from these events, delve deeper into the technological and strategic intricacies of World War II. Subscribe for further insights and consider offering suggestions for themes you wish to explore, as we uncover the complex tapestry woven through the annals of military history. As the summer of 1944 waned, the battlefield dynamics in Western Europe underwent a transformative shift. The Allied forces, emboldened by successes in Normandy, began employing new tactics that would later define the clash between German and Allied armored units. Central to this conflict was the Panther tank, a symbol of German engineering supremacy, which was soon to find its vulnerabilities exposed through strategic missteps and an evolving understanding of armored warfare. The introduction of innovative American tactics, including combined arms operations and maneuver warfare, pressured the traditional German reliance on the static superiority of their armored divisions. The U.S. Army, leveraging its vast resources and dynamic command structure, capitalized on the Panther's Achilles heel, the compromised side armor, which had been a topic of internal debate among engineers, but rarely discussed in the hallowed halls of high command. The Panther, with its sloped armor design, was originally hailed as the pinnacle of tank technology. This impressive engineering feat was designed for frontal engagements, allowing it to withstand direct hits from the majority of Allied anti-tank weaponry. However, as extensive testing and battlefield observations later revealed, the armor was not uniformly robust. The side armor was significantly thinner, leaving it vulnerable to flanking maneuvers. especially from the new American M4 Sherman tanks, which employed tactical formations effectively, exploiting gaps in German defenses. These newly evolved tactics saw U.S. forces adopting envelopment strategies, aiming to strike at the German flanks and rear, where the Panther crews, secure in their self-perceived invulnerability, often remained unprepared. The logistics behind these engagements were equally crucial, representing an intricate web of supply chains, aerial reconnaissance, and mobile infantry support. Allied air superiority, a direct result of extensive strategic bombing campaigns, particularly the destruction of rail networks and fuel depots, further complicated the situation for German armored divisions. The necessity for German commanders to not only concentrate their armored units, but to also maintain cohesion and communication became paramount. However, as the tide turned against them, miscommunication became endemic due to the relentless pace of combat and the devastating impact of repeated airstrikes on command nodes. The human experience within these armored behemoths was sculpted by dread and desperation. Panther crews, once positioned as elite warriors in the German Wehrmacht, now found themselves encased in metal coffins. Many soldiers faced the harrowing experience of knowing their vulnerability in isolated skirmishes against superior and increasingly adaptive Allied forces. The trauma of battle manifested in stark narratives. Fellow soldiers burned alive in their tanks due to direct hits from incendiary munitions, while others faced capture, forced into servitude in a war they had faith would end in their favor. The psychological toll was profound. The men who once stood shoulder to shoulder with pride were now left grappling with fear, isolation, and uncertainty, their beliefs shattered by relentless hostility. As U.S. forces advanced during Operation Cobra, an audacious plan aimed at breaching the German lines in Normandy. They implemented techniques that would redefine modern warfare. The innovative deployment of air support coupled with on-the-ground infantry tactics aimed at overwhelming German defenses placed immense pressure on the operational capacity of the Panther units. The Germans, unable to adapt quickly enough, found themselves unable to restore the tactical sophistication that had once typified their approach. This was further exacerbated by the fact that the industrial output for the production of the Panther had begun to fall behind the operational requirements of the front lines. As casualties mounted and replacement tanks dwindled, the strategic implications became dire. Command decisions during this phase were critical, as the German high command oscillated between misjudgments and underestimations of Allied capabilities. Misallocations of resources meant frontline divisions were often left scrambling for spare parts and ammunition, exacerbating the operational issues that plagued many Panther crews. The once feared tank began to exhibit chinks in its armor, both literally and figuratively, as operational deficiencies mounted under the pressure of opportunistic Allied forces. The results were harrowing. Entire battalions faced encirclement and annihilation due to a combination of tactical miscalculations and the relentless advance of well-coordinated Allied units. As the Allies tightened their grip on German positions, instances of betrayal and collapse became increasingly common. Many tankmen reported feelings of abandonment as their commanders made desperate attempts to manage deteriorating situations without adequate support or reinforcement. The realities of war tailored these individual experiences. Some men experienced the visceral horror of combat up close, while others were paralyzed by paralyzing fear or dealt with the emotional fallout of losing comrades they deeply cared for. The bonds forged in the crucible of warfare were both fragile and profound. The lasting legacy of the Panther tank was shaped not just by its mechanical prowess, but by the profound human experiences of those who operated it. The battlefield actions during this phase of the war depict a larger narrative concerning the interplay of technology and human will. Each Panther was both a testament to German engineering and a vehicle of despair for the men inside when faced with unexpected adversity. The ethos of combat, with its raw thrill and terror, persisted even amid systemic societal collapse, underscoring the conflict's duality. In sum, the experiences of soldiers in the Panther crews exemplify a critical turning point in World War II. As they faced the stark reality of combat, They were forced to reconcile their faith in technology with the grim enormity of human loss. The vulnerability of the German armored forces was laid bare, revealing how reliance on technological supremacy without an agile tactical response could lead to catastrophic failure. The rise and fall of the Panther was a poignant reminder of the enduring tensions in warfare, between man, machine, and the chaos of conflict, where the true cost of war is measured not only in lost equipment, but also in the irrevocable impact on the individuals who are compelled to fight under its banner. As the summer of 1944 unfurled its sweltering blanket over the Eastern Front, the hopes of German tank crews were increasingly overshadowed by the relentless onslaught of Allied forces. Within the confines of their formidable Panther tanks, these crews held tightly to the belief that their machinery, having been heralded as a paragon of armored engineering, would provide them with sufficient protection against the grim realities of modern warfare. The Panther's sloped armor was designed to deflect incoming rounds, promising better survival rates in a world where the cacophony of battle could drown out even the most rational of thoughts. Yet, unbeknownst to them, this very strength harbored a critical weakness: its lateral vulnerability, starkly illuminated by field tests conducted by U.S. Army engineers, would soon become a harbinger of their misfortunes. The battlefield of Normandy, suffused with noise from artillery and the cries of the wounded, became a crucible for the Panther crews, whose realities soon starkly diverged from the triumph stemming from the tank's prior accolades. At first glance, these armored behemoths appeared resilient. Their good speed-to-weight ratio, impressive firepower, and sloped armor made them one of the most feared tanks on the battlefield. However, a string of tests conducted on captured Panthers revealed a deeply ingrained fault within their design. When targeted from the sides, the supposedly near-impenetrable armor often failed to safeguard the crew from destruction. U.S. tank crews deployed the new M4 Sherman with a bevy of tactical adjustments informed by immense technological support. Employing the tank's cannon against the Panthers, they were able to exploit the latter's side armor weakness with ruthless efficiency. The increasingly battered German frontline units faced historical high combat attrition rates exacerbated by the dismal reality of resupply. As the Allies expanded their capabilities, particularly in coordination and stealth operations, German command struggled to pivot from an environment of technological excellence to one steeped in scarcity and resilience. By prioritizing machine supremacy for so long, the Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht found themselves overextended, encumbered by their dogma that hardware alone would win the war. The dwindling supply lines made instant replenishment of munitions and spare parts near impossible, leaving many Panther units at the precipice of operational failure. An entire division could find itself immobilized not by the enemy, but by the severe depletion of essential resources, including fuel and ammunition. Within these beleaguered battalions, the experiences of individual soldiers became entangled in the machinery of military failure. Crew members, once confident in their ballistic shields, confronted the psychological toll of dwindling morale. Survivors grappled with the underlying fear that camaraderie formed upon the bloodied soil of war could evaporate at a moment's notice under the explosive fury of enemy fire. Battles were not merely fought on the field. They were waged within each Panther, where the team dynamic comprised the essential mental fortitude required for survival. The relationships forged in the heat of battle became their lifeline, but these bonds were increasingly strained as they faced the darkness of insurmountable pressure from both the enemy and their own failing commanders. As Allied forces dissected the German tactical framework, they capitalized on intelligence gathering and reconnaissance missions, mapping out Panther patrol routes and creating an elaborate web of ambushes. It was a new paradigm of warfare, where cunning strategy supplanted brute force. The U.S. Army utilized their Shermans with infantry support, often engaging the Panzer crews from a distance, deliberately avoiding direct confrontations where they knew the Panther had an advantage. The rhythm of warfare shifted. One moment, in the din of battle, a Sherman would lay down suppressive fire, drawing the German crews into a defensive position. In the next instant, A well-coordinated flanking maneuver from newly acquired tank destroyers would erupt, overwhelming the Panther crews who were accustomed to operating in isolation, rather than in a network of interconnected warfare. Commanders' decisions affected not just the strategies employed, but profoundly influenced the human element within their ranks. The German leadership often found themselves at odds with the realities unfolding on the ground. Faced with soldier resignations, many commanders opted to cling to orders from Berlin, sometimes to the detriment of their men. The ethos of absolute loyalty rotted at the core, as the realization that their leadership was disconnected from the brutal front lines sank into the ranks. On one notable occasion, a Panther Company commander, emboldened by lingering faith in their superior technology, refused to relinquish territory even when it became evident that their position was untenable. Consequently, lives were lost needlessly, punctuating the cost of blind obedience to doctrine over strategic candor. In contrast, the Allies learned to master the psychological dimension of warfare. Increasingly, they employed psychological operations and deception tactics that exploited the German tank crews' growing apprehension. The constant threat of ambush contributed to a pervasive anxiety that infiltrated the psyche of tank crew members, with many beginning to believe it was only a matter of time before the next ambush could render them a pile of twisted metal. Intelligence activities became critical, allowing Allied forces to keep track of German unit movements and whether or not they were flanked. The narrative of impending doom manufactured by the Allies fed a narrative of despair within the German ranks, creating an environment where the air was thick with uncertainty and dread. The mounting fears of the German tank crews eventually culminated in a dramatic re-evaluation of their operational methodologies. In a desperate bid to counteract the inadequacies of supply and strategy, some units sought to create makeshift armored formations. They reinforced their vehicles with improvised armor crafted from spare parts, hoping to plug the gaps that had become their undoing. However, such patchwork solutions were akin to putting a bandage on a festering wound. It did little to mask the systemic issues plaguing their leadership and supply chains. Ultimately, the demise of the might-have-been legacy of the Panther tank serves not only as a story of metal and machinery, but as a stark representation of the harrowing human cost of war. As the battles raged on, it became abundantly clear that the interplay between technological innovation and human resilience would define not only the strategies employed on the battlefield, but the enduring legacy etched into the minds of those who served. The Panther crews became living testimonies of the chasm between confidence and reality, celebrating the ingenuity of German engineering while mourning the losses borne by their fleeting faith in an infallible machine amidst the chaos. Their story, filled with hope, yet marred by despair, became a poignant example of the devastating complexities of combat, where man ultimately grapples with the limits of his creations against a backdrop of relentless devastation. As the war progressed, the might of the German Panther tank continued to face an array of tactical dilemmas, exacerbated by diminished resources and an increasingly embattled command structure. Each confrontation on the eastern and western fronts served as a testament to the tank's formidable firepower and mobility, but also exposed critical vulnerabilities that were being relentlessly exploited by the Allies. The storied armor of the Panther was initially lauded as revolutionary, a blend of sloped plates and advanced metallurgy, granting it an impressive resistance against Allied projectiles. Yet a significant oversight loomed. The side armor, while robust, was woefully thin and poorly configured, transforming the Panther into an undesirable target when flanked or ambushed by enemy units employing guerrilla tactics. As Panther crews marched into engagement, they often relied heavily on their perceived strength against smaller groups of enemy tanks or armored personnel, ignoring the lessons learned from previous confrontations. The tank's primary armament, the impressive 75mm KWK-42L70 gun, enabled German units to strike from a distance, creating a false sense of security. This overconfidence proved dire as they often advanced without sufficient reconnaissance or flanking cover. While German armored divisions initially sought to dominate open fields, the shifting theater of war, characterized by urban environments and dense forests, rendered their strategies susceptible to detailed Allied tactics designed to exploit the Panther's inherent weaknesses. The U.S. military's tactical evolution highlighted how adaptive command responses could reshape the battlefield landscape dramatically. In contrast to the rigid doctrines often observed within the Wehrmacht, American commanders embraced unorthodox methods. Utilizing the Sherman tank, characterized by its adaptability and production numbers rather than armor alone, U.S. forces effectively engaged German units by employing combined arms tactics, integrating air support, artillery strikes, and infantry coordination to deliver a devastating blow to German mechanized formations. The Wolfpack tactic, where small groups of Shermans collaborated to flank and isolate Panther tanks, showcased the critical importance of communication and mobility over raw power. As the German crews became increasingly isolated, they were compelled to re-evaluate their strategic implementations, moving away from traditional concentrated armored assaults to more decentralized engagements. As the tide turned in several pivotal battles, notably at Kursk and later during the relentless campaign in Normandy, the realization of their dire state surged among the Panther crews. Reports from the front illustrated a disturbing trend. Fledgling units faced overwhelming odds on all fronts due to miscommunication among commanders and the logistical failure to provide adequate supplies and air support. The lack of fuel became a pervasive concern as the logistical machine of the German war effort began to falter. Tank units, which once charged into battle with confident ferocity, were now forced onto the defensive, executing desperate tactical formations primarily designed to protect themselves from encirclement and ambush. This arduous reality had profound psychological impacts on the men operating these fearsome machines. Once infused with pride at commanding such an innovative piece of engineering, the crews became haunted by the specter of defeat, facing moral dilemmas in their roles as soldiers. Each engagement resulted in mounting casualties. Mates who had shared camaraderie and valor were turned to ash in the flames of combat. The sight of destroyed Panther tanks littering the battlefield magnified their existential crisis. Their symbol of strength had transformed into a monument to despair. The very metallic giants that once embodied their hopes now echoed stories of loss and sorrow, leading to diminished morale and trust in the command structure that failed to anticipate these shifting dynamics. As U.S. intelligence and reconnaissance increasingly identified the Panther's structural vulnerabilities, strategies became honed to exist in a rhythm of calculated risk and aggression, knowing that an open engagement could yield a disastrous defeat without adequate planning. The use of the new M26 Pershing tanks and more capable anti-tank weapons further amplified the pressure on Panther crews, turning opportunities into despair and leaving them bereft of options. Each encounter forced German leaders into a tactical microcosm, the constricted corridors of operation, where their armored might was at the mercy of small cadre units expertly coordinated within the multifaceted landscape of war. With every engagement, the Panthers found themselves at a strategic crossroads. The tensions between maintaining traditional war paradigms versus evolving toward asymmetrical tactics illustrated the painful adaptations necessary for survival. The impending collapse of the Wehrmacht necessitated a reckoning among tank crews. The specter of surrender or grave miscalculations rearranged their collective psyche. Strategy meetings often devolved into lamentations for fallen comrades as they faced the grim reality of finite resources and dwindling safety. Many of these soldiers displayed astounding resilience, continuing to challenge their circumstances, yet weighing the futility of fighting a war turned untenable by decisions made at the highest levels. Escalating tensions translated to a scramble for innovation. Training initiatives sprung into motion to film and employ new tactics, retraining crews for ambush responses and more versatile battlefield approaches. Ultimately, the Panther tank represented far more than a formidable piece of machinery. It emerged as a symbol of the shifting complexities of warfare, encapsulating both the triumphs and tragedies of its human operators. In this flood of exhilaration and despair, these armored crews oscillated between expectations and the harsh realities forced upon them by their failing institutions. The looming realization that overconfidence in mechanized warfare could result in devastating results became evident on the tumultuous paths of conflict. Each tank's rumble over burned earth reverberated with the echoes of spiraling loss and unresolved potential. As the war drew to an unceremonious end in Europe, the legacy of the Panther and its crews remained entrenched in the annals of history. Their experiences provided crucial lessons about the limitations of technology when confronted with adaptable tactics and the treacherous specter of over-reliance on a singular method of warfare. Human perseverance, ingenuity, and vulnerability interlaced dramatically within the metallic confines of these battles. The duality of man and machine exposed more than technical failures, revealing a story far richer in nuance, where the dance of survival entwined in the shadows of steel. In the closing years of World War II, as the Axis powers grappled with an increasingly desperate situation, the renowned German Panther tank stood as a testament to both engineering prowess and operational deception. Its production represented the pinnacle of German armored innovation, boasting a well-balanced combination of firepower, mobility, and armor protection. However, beneath this veneer of superiority lay critical vulnerabilities, particularly in the areas of tactical deployment and operational doctrine that would soon come to light, notably under the scrutiny of Allied testing regimes. Panther crews, many of whom were comprised of men hastily inducted into combat roles, found themselves torn between the ambitions of mechanized warfare and the unforgiving realities they faced on the battlefield. The so-called fatal side weakness turned from a mere technical flaw into a harbinger of doom for many armored units entrusted with the pride of the Wehrmacht. As operational fronts shifted in early 1945, German tank battalions were increasingly forced into ad hoc formations, contending with a dwindling supply of experienced personnel and diminishing logistical support. The production lines were strained to their limits by relentless Allied bombings and the chaos ushered in by the Soviet offensives from the east. Panther crews, who once maneuvered with the confidence of elite soldiers, found themselves scrambling to adapt to the unpredictability of the battlefield. Frequent instances of ambushes by U.S. forces utilizing highly mobile tactics, including the innovative use of anti-tank weaponry like the M36 Jackson, heightened the stakes and altered the once structured engagements into a chaotic, brutal gunfight that bore no resemblance to traditional tank warfare principles. Amid this turmoil, tactical adaptations were paramount. As the Allies refined their approaches to tank engagement, German crews employed a variety of strategies, often delving into a more guerrilla-like warfare ethos. The flexibility of Panther commanders focused on quick, decisive strikes, drawing upon the tank's high-velocity 75mm gun, which proved capable of engaging enemy armor at impressive ranges. Nevertheless, these tactics were predicated on maintaining a tactical superiority that steadily eroded in the face of overwhelming enemy numbers and superior tank technology, like the M4 Sherman, with its versatile adaptations and the increasing presence of specialized anti-tank units. Furthermore, the accelerating tempo of warfare left little time for extensive training or the development of cooperative maneuvers between infantry and armored units. In the fog of war, Panther crews learned to rely heavily on the strengths of their tanks, while painfully aware of their increasing isolation from logistical and command support. The psychological toll weighed heavily as they faced the prospect of their fate hanging by a thread, often marked by grim decisions of when to engage and when to retreat. The complexities of battlefield communication deteriorated rapidly in such a frenzied atmosphere. German tactical communications had once been efficient. However, as Allied jamming techniques progressed, critical information became distorted, leading to catastrophic misunderstandings in unit coordination. The Panther operator now became a reluctant risk-taker and strategist, with every battle won or lost unfolding as a personal saga of survival amid their crumbling command structure. Critical analysis reveals that at the operational level, the Panther's formidable strengths were frequently neutralized by tactical failures ranging from the compounded effects of battlefield attrition to the adaptation of Allied forces outsmarting German armored doctrine. The revelation of the Panther's side armor vulnerabilities specifically made the interactions of the crew with their environment even more precarious. While they trusted in their vehicle's composite armor, often credited with resisting penetration from frontal attacks, they remained tragically unaware that hardened munitions developed by U.S. forces, particularly shaped charges often carried by the bazooka and other anti-tank weapons, could exploit this weakness ruthlessly. As antagonistic reports emerged from the Allied testing camps, the reality of battlefield failures seemed inconceivable to those who depended upon the Panther's legacy of strength. Each engagement bore bitter lessons. Infantrymen stood awash in the grim prospect of treading quietly through the wreckage of their advanced machines, now shattered and under fire. Alongside these harsh combat realities were deeply human dimensions that cannot be understated. The stories of these Panzer crews, often mingled with the intense camaraderie and unyielding loyalty formed under fire, paint a vivid portrait of resilience against brutal odds. Men who once entered the war as idealistic young soldiers quickly became delineated by loss, forging a bond over shared experiences of fear and survival amid the cacophony of battle. Personal tragedies became collateral in a war where moral imperatives were as compromised as the machinery of war they operated. For many, the helplessness when witnessing comrades besieged or facing inferno under artillery lights became a crucible that forged determination, weighed against the suffocating dread that their own mortality could be claimed in the next surge or the subsequent explosion. The battlefields of Europe witnessed a rise in heroism juxtaposed against the absurdities of war. The Panther tank may have represented an adaptive technological evolution, but its crews became metaphors for a tragic acceptance of defeat looming just on the horizon. As the march towards Berlin hastened, with every new engagement, the looming specter of surrender reshaped the once unyielding collective mentality of German tank crews. Adaptation amidst failure became their only ally, as relentless encounters transformed the battlefield into a living tapestry of loss. Each scarred fragment of terrain, a whisper of the price paid for technological zealousness and strategic missteps. The collective experiences of Panther crews epitomized mankind's tumultuous relationship with reliance on technology and warfare. They were symbolic of the harsh truths surrounding mechanized combat. Armored brilliance was not a guarantee of victory when overshadowed by the impermanence of command structures, logistical failures, and the very essence of human fragility. As history recounts the advancements of armor and military jeep during the war, it is imperative to acknowledge the human elements embedded within this narrative, the choices, the sacrifices, and the unimaginable resilience born from struggle. When the clouds of war finally lifted over Europe, the legacy of the Panther stood not only as a reflection of its mechanical capabilities, but as a testament to the courage and vulnerability of the men who trusted in its armor, often bewildered by the unfolding storm raging both around them and within their own hearts. As the conflict in Europe intensified during the final phases of World War II, the Panther tank emerged as a paradox. A formidable piece of engineering, it was considered one of the finest tanks of its time, boasting a combination of firepower, mobility, and protection. The designers celebrated its strengths. However, the reality of combat revealed critical shortcomings that were not immediately apparent during the earlier phases of the war. One notable vulnerability, particularly devastating for the crews operating the Panther, lay in the tank's side armor. Officially rated for significant protection against a variety of anti-tank weapons, U.S. tests divulged a tragic susceptibility in the design, a weakness that would be exploited by Allied forces. As the Allies conducted their plans for offensives, including the ambitious Operation Cobra and the breakout from Normandy, they began to adapt their tactics to outmaneuver and decisively confront the seemingly invincible German armor, bringing the Panther to the forefront of this lethal titanic struggle. The Panther's design, with a sloped hull that maximized its frontal armored protection, was revolutionary. Nonetheless, this innovative feature came at a cost. The tank's side armor was notably thinner than its frontal counterpart. This flaw, long underestimated by the Panther's crews and commanders, was further exacerbated by the emergent tactics adopted by American formations, which sought to counteract the German advantages through envelopment and flanking maneuvers. In a cruel twist of fate, many German tank crews marched into battle believing that their protective vehicles would safeguard their lives in the cauldron of combat. In these high-stakes environments, the decision to engage often hinged not merely on the technical specifications of their tanks, but also on the calculations of human judgment and the merciless realities of warfare. As the battlefields of the West erupted into chaos, the reliance on the Panther's armor, once a source of pride, transformed into a harbinger of despair. Amidst the clash of steel and the roar of artillery, the tactical shifts employed by U.S. forces illustrated a dawning understanding of the combat dynamics at play. The Americans had learned firsthand the consequences of underestimating their adversary. After facing devastating losses during encounters with German armor, American forces restructured their strategies. They enhanced the use of combined arms operations, seamlessly integrating infantry support with armored advances. This synergy proved significantly more effective and harrowing for German crews, as the concentrated assault tactics allowed American forces to support their operations with comprehensive fire support, thus forcing Germans to adopt increasingly desperate defensive postures. The Mediterranean campaign had provided critical insights into these tactics, lessons that flowed into the Normandy invasion and beyond. The entry of new anti-tank weaponry further underscored the challenges faced by Panther crews. The M10 Wolverine tank destroyers, specially designed to counter the German tanks, began to see action alongside infantry divisions, delivering focused fire directly at the Panther's weak points. These engagements quickly turned into harrowing contests of survival, as American gunners relished the chance to exploit the vulnerabilities of their opponents. The stories emerging from the battlefield became increasingly grim for the once mighty Panther crews, whose faith in their tanks' capabilities waned. The psychological impact on the soldiers, many of whom had entered service imbued with nationalistic fervor and technological pride, began to unravel under the relentless pressures of combat. They faced the dilemma of maneuvering their armored vehicles while casting uneasy glances at the enemy infantry and anti-tank positions that could easily cloak in the dense European forests and farmland. Human factors were key in determining the eventual outcome of confrontations between Panther crews and Allied forces. Fortitude and aptitude could not alone mend the deficiencies in design that plagued the tank or shield its crew from the psychological strain inflicted by near-constant warfare. Fractured lines of command became evident, as higher officials were often out of touch with the realities faced in the field. Tactical decisions made at the front were forced to wrestle against a backdrop of dwindling resources and deteriorating morale. Fuel shortages and mechanical reliability issues compounded the plight of the Panzer crews, who were increasingly becoming disillusioned with the war's realities. As the war dragged on, the bittersweet symphony of bravery and resignation resonated within their ranks, as too many of these tankers found themselves wrestling with the juxtaposition of their initial zeal against the looming despair of lost battles, dead comrades, and the impending collapse of the Wehrmacht. The culmination of these factors bore witness to grievous losses during engagements such as the Battle of the Bulge. What was once envisioned as a grand counteroffensive turned into chaos as American forces regrouped and fought back tenaciously against the German advance. The effectiveness of the Panther was diminished not only by mechanical limitations, but also by the hollowing out of its combat morale. As battles morphed into desperate skirmishes, those within the tanks often spoke in a language of quiet resignation. Survival became their singular goal. The soldiers, ensconced in their iron shells, transformed into reluctant harbingers of their own vulnerabilities, each confrontation stripping away the remnants of assurance in their tanks. Panther crews, caught in the maelstrom of shifting brutality, faced an unforgiving landscape. Each fire exchanged became a testament to the human struggle, juxtaposed against the ideology of technological supremacy that had initially propelled the war efforts of the Third Reich. Over time, the truth emerged that no amount of armor or mechanized capability could shield individuals from the omnipresent shadow of death that loomed with an unyielding insistence. As German forces retreated and fumbled their commands, hoping to maintain any semblance of control, many crews realized that their once proud steed now mirrored the fragility of the human condition, entwined within the endeavor of warfare. Ultimately, the legacy of the Panther can be seen as twofold: an emblem of advanced military technology and a poignant reflection upon the soldiers who relied on its prowess and ultimately bore the brunt of its failures. Their stories, embedded in the metal of the Panther's armor, reflected the heavy heart of conflict, where valor coexisted with vulnerability, hinting at deeper questions about the fragile interplay between man and machine in the crucible of war. The sobering lessons learned from such tragic experiences have since continued to echo throughout military history, a reminder that strength lies not only in material capability, but in the indomitable spirit of the human will amidst the chaos of human conflict.